through the lens of this workshop this morning. And we're going to touch on most of these really important words in our mission throughout this morning's presentation. So just keep that frame in mind as we're looking through the curriculum, is how the mission relates to our curriculum. I'd like to introduce the curriculum faculty for our district. There are 3 of us present today. I'm going to introduce those that are not here, and I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves. So we'll start with Jerry Woolsey, our assistant superintendent. She is not here today because she's busy with priority number 1, student and staff well-being at one of our schools right now.
We're in a Raptor training where it's an emergency response notification system. So they're actually role-playing the reunification process if we ever have to evacuate a building, how we will go about reunifying parents with kids. So it's a mock drill, and she's in charge of that.
Yes. And there's a chance that some cell phones might go off during this presentation because of the signals that go out.
Our alert system, even our drills, are not mutable, which is fine. That means if I'm ever in a meeting on silent, I won't miss an important notification. So if you hear it, that's a great point. Thank you, Ms. Albin.
I'm Liz Albin, Director of Curriculum. Also unable to attend today is Shelley Eastman. She's our Director of Federal Programs. I will do my best to cover her part about grants. I may ask some of my colleagues to jump in with additional information about grants. Also, Margaret Stevenson, she is our Advanced Learning Programs Coordinator, and Cassie Veru is our CTE Coordinator. And I'll be giving you some information about both of those programs within our school district. I would like to turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
I'm Vicki Trujillo, and I'm the Director of Special Education.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Sipe, and I'm the Coordinator for Curriculum and Assessments.
Yes? Oh, okay. All right. So this is the team of people that work on curriculum. Of course, we all frequently report to Dr. Dorner as well, just so she is aware of and is very knowledgeable about all of our curriculum. The first bit of information we're going to go through are the curriculum laws and policies. You can see on the right side of the screen there's a diagram that shows all the different entities that affect curriculum, starting with U.S. federal legislation. It then, their legislation informs Arizona state legislation. And then from state legislation, it informs the 2 entities below that, State Board of Education and Department of Education. And I was doing just a little bit of research on both of those. I thought it might be interesting to you to know that the State Board of Education is created by the Arizona Constitution, and it's charged with the responsibility of regulating the conduct of the public school system. The Superintendent of Public Instruction was also created with the Arizona Constitution, and it's a publicly elected position. Currently it's Tom Horn. And then that department, the Arizona Department of Education, is overseen by the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and that department was created in 1970. So underneath of those 2 entities then are Arizona Public Schools. So I'm going to give you a quick little challenge, test your assumptions. Where would the Kingman Unified School District School Board fit in? You can draw on your slide where does our board members fit on this agenda or on this diagram. So do you have a guess where the school board falls? Let's see if your guess is correct. Anybody choose? Right. Oh, gone altogether. Right. Just so so school board and then all of the public schools. Yes. So the school board has the responsibility of being aware of all of the entities above it and with all the legislation, and then enacts their own board policies to enforce the legislation. This is a list of many of the state statutes that affect public education. However, it's not all of them. We'll be focusing today on just those that are bolded and have a star next to them. That's what's tabbed in your binders. You do have a copy of all of these statutes in your binders. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, statutes is another word for, anybody know what those are? Laws. Yes, statutes are another word. It's just state statutes is another word for laws. So anything that is written into law is what we are expected to include in our schools. So I'm going to point out that all of these statutes are legislation that we are expected to follow, but they're also best practices for education that they've been enacted into statute because it is what's best for students, usually. This next slide is board policies. Again, these are what you have copies of in your binders. We'll be focusing on just the ones that are starred and bolded. And there are more board policies related to curriculum, but everything in section I of the board policy is curriculum related. I do want to go back for just a second to the statutes, just so you know the way that the statutes are organized is that all of the statutes under Title 15 are education related, and those that come from Chapter 7, that chapter is entitled Instruction, and underneath of Instruction, Chapter 7, there are 7 articles, and those articles range from curriculum to alternative education programs and many things in between. So if you go to the revised statutes and go to Title 15, Chapter 7, that's where you'll find curriculum-related statutes. The reason we're starting here is because this is where our Arizona state standards come from, is from state statutes. I have noted here ARS 15701 and 15701.01. Those are both curriculum-related statutes. The first one, 701, it states that it's for common schools, and common schools is how Arizona references schools that are in grades K through 8. And then the 01 is high schools. It is once you start deciphering the code, very interesting. So we'll go to tab number 2, just to look at these 2 statutes. These are the first 2 statutes that you have under tab 2. These are the more lengthy statutes related to education. They're 3 pages long each. And you'll see, it says, if you're looking at 15701, right next to it, it gives kind of a summary of what's included in this statute. So you'll see the word common school, which is the K-8. And the very number 1 underneath the State Board of Education shall, number 1 says prescribe a minimum course of study incorporating the academic standards adopted by the State Board of Education to be taught in the common schools. So that is where our state standards come from, is through this legislation. If you want to look at tab, this is, as I mentioned, the high school statute. It's kind of interesting that they're separate statutes for K-8 and high school because there's different needs of students in those grade ranges. And again, the first point under letter A, prescribe a minimum course of study that incorporates the academic standards adopted by the state board for the graduation of pupils from high school. And you can see just the slight change in wording is that number 1 is very specific to common schools, and 01, the high school, talks specifically about the graduation of pupils from high school. So that is the goal with that statute. Some other facts about the statutes: all standards are written and revised by the academic standards team at ADE, and they are all located on the ADE website. You have that in your PowerPoint. And if you just go to the ADE website, it's very easy to find the standards linked there. And a little bit of history about the state standards is that in 2010 is when the Common Core standards were released, and Arizona adopted them in 2010. And then in 2016, because those standards did not meet the needs of Arizona, educators worked with ADE to revise them, and you'll see that the English Language Arts, or ELA standards in math, were revised in 2016, and then the Science, History, and Social Studies were revised in 2018. So we don't teach the Common Core standards, we teach the Arizona academic standards. And those two revisions were due to the Common Core not meeting our needs in Arizona. All of the subjects that are taught in KUSD have Arizona standards. There are either academic standards or even our CTE programs have specific standards that are relevant to them. And then all Arizona's academic standards are vertically aligned, and I'm going to give you an example of that in just a minute. So we're going to flip to tab 4. That's where the sample standards are. We're going to look at a reading standard, which is the first standard, or the first vertical alignment behind tab 4. This standard,
Are you going to explain what vertical alignment
Yep.
means? Okay.
Yep. So the overarching reading standard that we're looking at right now is written at the top. It says it's an anchor standard, and that is analyze how and why individuals, events, and ideas develop and interact over the course of a text. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned the title at the top says Reading Literature Standard 3. So this is specifically looking at literature. There are another set of reading standards for informational text, but we're just looking at literature, and this is the third one in the group of literature standards. So like I said, that anchor standard is the overarching standard for everything listed below it. And along the left side, you'll see that there is a letter for kindergarten or a number for each grade. And you'll see how that standard develops through each grade level. It's kind of nice to track how it develops as students are going through their educational career. So I'm going to give you a little challenge. You can work with your table, of course, but I'd like you to look for the verbs in each of these standards and circle them. And so a verb is an action word, so you're looking for what students are doing. I don't want to make assumptions that we all remember verbs, but if you'll circle the verbs for each of those standards. And you can check with your table partners to make sure you have the verbs circled. Once you have the verb circled, I'd really like for you to talk with your table about what you notice about what the students are doing. Well, let's start with the kindergarten. What is the verb that you circled there? Identify. Prompting and support, identify, yep. I think kindergarten's probably the trickiest one. The rest of them, the first word is the verb in each standard. So kindergarten starts with that identify, and then you'll see describe, 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 describe.
Explain.
Mm-hmm. Compare and contrast, and analyze. So now, will you take a minute to talk with your table about the difference between describing and analyzing with your table partners?
Me describing is just giving, a use the same word,
Yeah.
the characteristics, but analyzing needs to dive into the whys and the wheres and
The motivation and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's described, yeah, it's, okay, here's the.
So this conversation is something that we will frequently have with teachers, is looking at the verbs, what are students expected to do. It is, we are definitely looking at it in isolation without looking at the rest of the standard, but just starting with the verbs, you can see that the thinking required gets a little bit deeper the older students go. That is definitely not to say that there's not deep thinking going on in the younger grades. We fully expect our kindergartners and first graders to be using their thinking skills so that way they're ready to move up each grade level.
Start by describing the people, places, and things, and then they move on to traits
Right,
and other
right,
higher level descriptions.
right. So the concept that comes after the verb will definitely go in more depth as students than just looking at the verb. So just to give you an example of some of the lessons that could go along with this standard in kindergarten, so the one with prompting and support, identify character settings and major events in a story. So something a kindergarten student might do is to write or draw characters, setting, and main events of a story on a graphic organizer. So that's something that the teacher would give them and the student would fill out with that information. And then in third grade, based on that standard of describing characters in a story, they might complete a chart that describes the character's traits, motivations, or feelings. So now they're moving on, besides just identifying those story elements, now they're describing them a little bit. Then in fifth grade, they're required to compare and contrast two or more characters. So now we're not just taking one character, we're looking at two and seeing how they're similar and different. And so a student might create a graphic organizer, maybe a Venn diagram that shows how the characters overlap in similarities or differences, or how they're totally different from each other. In eighth grade, it says analyze how particular lines of dialogues or incidents in a story or drama propel the action. And so the students may be having discussions with their classmates about the dialogue and asking questions and answers of each other. And then finally, they're analyzing the impact of authors' choices in how the story develops. And so an activity that you might see in an upper level high school class is students sitting in a Socratic seminar, talking with each other with a teacher on the outside, monitoring the discussion and making sure that students are on track, but the students fully guiding that discussion. So you can see there's a big progression from kindergarten through high school within that same standard. And then we'll just very quickly look at this math standard. Math is interesting because the standards are so interwoven. So this is definitely a very specific strand within a math concept. It's operations and algebraic thinking in first grade, and it goes down to Algebra 1. So what students are learning in first grade fully influences what they're learning in Algebra 1, and that's what the vertical articulation is just showing how the standard progresses each year. So you'll see in first grade, they're starting with addition and subtraction, first and second grade. Third and fourth grade, they move on to multiplication. And then once they get up into fifth grade through algebra, they're using those basic facts to help them solve problems and evaluate expressions in math. Also in this section, you do have a sample science standard vertical articulation, which we won't take the time to go through right now, but you do have that as a reference. And this came right from ADE's website, so there are more like this on the website. And then the final document in this section is all of the Arizona's history and social science standards. These are their anchor standards and where they are taught in each grade level, or it shows, yes, across. You can look and see which grade level that specific standard is taught. Before I move on from that, are there any questions or clarifications I can make? Okay. So now that we've looked at some sample standards, we're going to move on to curriculum. And KUSD curriculum starts with state statute. If we go back to tab 2, and if you find state statute 15721 and 15722, it's, I believe, a little bit towards the middle of the statutes. The difference between these is 721 is for common schools and 722 is for high schools. And you'll see the very first letter, A, says the governing board shall approve for common schools the course of study, the basic textbook for each course, and all units recommended for credit under each general subject title before implementing the course. So that's where our KUSD board comes in, that all curriculum is approved by the school board. I was reading from the 721 for common schools, and if you look at 722, that letter A is the same. It's that the governing board shall approve for high schools the course of study and all units that are recommended for credit under each general subject title before implementing the course. And then letter B is more, so letter A is about the specific courses that are taught in high school, and letter B is about the curriculum that is used in high schools. I'm going to keep moving, but if you please.
I'm just going to add in,
Yes.
Liz, when I'm on 15722, for example, the high school. The governing board shall, and then numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you're reading that as a governing board member, provide information on the school district's website. While it says governing board shall, that's where your delegate, the superintendent and her team, make sure it's done. You don't literally have to do it, but we do it on your behalf. And then that's when we will inform you in school board meetings when policies change. That's those policy readings. If any part of this statute were to change and influence a change in policy, that's where the readings come in during the board meetings. So, everywhere the law says the governing board shall, we're your team to do that with you for you.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Dr. Dorner. That is a
That's
daunting
what, I didn't want them
task.
reading it later saying, oh my, I have a lot of tasks.
I got a lot of notes to take. I also have referenced on the slide that's on the screen right now several board policies. We'll come to those in just a minute, but you'll see how board policy supports those state statutes. So just some facts about KUSD curriculum adoption. Okay, I'm going to have you flipping again. We're going to go to section 3. This is where board policy is. And board policy IGD is where we're looking. You'll see this policy is titled Curriculum Adoption. You'll see that all new, this is coming from state statute, it should look familiar to what we just read. All new programs and courses of study will be subject to board approval, as well as elimination of programs and courses and extensive alteration in their content. Curricular proposals from the professional staff may be presented to the superintendent, who will be responsible for making recommendations to the board on such matters. Meetings of authorized textbook selection committees shall comply with open meeting law requirements.
New, correct? That is one of the ones you all
Yes.
just recently
Yes.
approved.
So I'm going to give you just a few more facts about curriculum adoption. I will say the rest of the statute the rest of this policy gives you prohibited instruction of things that we're not allowed to incorporate into our instruction. So as Dr. Dorner just mentioned, all curriculum adoption meetings must follow open meeting laws, and that's beginning this school year. So we'll begin to have those meetings, and then recommendations from those curriculum meetings will come to the school board for recommendations of curriculum to be adopted. Which is, I appreciate the state statute, or I'm sorry, I appreciate this policy and state statute, because now we've always asked for input, and now you know as a board that it is required input, and you know that you're getting informed proposals from that includes the public. So it's a nice addition to. Yes, exactly. All of our core curriculum, and when I say core curriculum, that's the 4 cores: English language arts, math, science, and social studies, are on an 8-year adoption cycle, and I'll show you that cycle in just a minute, but we do have a system for going through our curriculum. And school leadership, so meaning principals and assistant principals and our instructional coaches, will meet with district staff to review the efficacy of our current curriculum and determine the need for adoption of new curriculum. So if we find as a district, and including school leadership, that our curriculum is good the way it is, then we don't necessarily have to adopt. But with that rotation cycle, we do have it built in for every curriculum.
And that
to
is
be
often
reviewed.
generated from the classroom, the
Yes.
teacher's level. They're the ones in the trenches firsthand, working with curriculum, and they can give us status on success or not success, or alignment or not alignment. And so Liz is sort of talking about after it promotes out of the classroom.
Correct.
Then
Yeah.
they'll meet with their schools, their principals, and then it'll come.
Right. And then all supplemental materials must be KUSD school board approved. So this is a fairly new statute. It's been in effect for a few years. So you'll see that we will bring supplemental materials. But that also now, with the first point up there, must go through public meetings. So even our supplemental materials will come through a public meeting before it's brought to the school board.
Can you give an example of what supplemental material would actually consist of? Because, like sometimes when they do their little things at the beginning of the class, they might be pulling current events or something like that. So obviously that's not considered a supplemental material, or how? What does that mean exactly?
Novels would be a supplemental material. So we have our current, the curriculum that we use every day with, that's the main focus of the classroom, and then it would be any other thing that would help them get to that. So we had Teachers Pay Teachers was a supplemental curriculum that was approved that teachers can access and bring into the classroom. To be honest, there aren't a whole lot of supplemental materials that we approve because we have our core curriculum in place. But should that happen, then it would come to you. Whoops, let me go back here. So our curriculum adoption procedure comes from board policy IGA and IJJ. So IGA is curriculum development, and this policy states that there's a need for a systematic ongoing evaluation of curriculum, and we involve students, parents, teachers, and administrators. So that's what Dr. Dorner was referring to, is as we're using the curriculum, we would get input from all of those entities, all those stakeholders, before we adopt anything. And then you'll see that it's our responsibility to continuously be reviewing the curriculum that we currently have. And then policy IJJ, and these are all alphabetical in here, just to help find them. This is the policy for supplemental materials, and it specifically mentions books, which would be novels and things that we would bring to you. It also has a section on public review, so that is when we have our curriculum meetings, and it's an open public meeting. That's written right into this board policy. Once we've determined that our current curriculum needs to be updated, so after we've had those conversations with staff members, administration, we will follow our curriculum adoption procedure, which is outlined up here on the screen. So the curriculum department, which would be that group of people that were at the beginning of this presentation, we would research any available curriculum. And then we meet with curriculum companies to gather information about what they have to offer, including ESSA evidence. So we'll talk about ESSA evidence in a little bit, but that is something that is provided by researchers, that they have researched the curriculum to show that it supports student mastery of standards and learning. And then we use that information that we gather to determine if it meets our criteria. We select the top 2 curriculum to pilot. And then this next bit is a description of what the pilot will look like. So we inform all relevant teaching staff of the curriculum to be piloted. We train all teacher volunteers on that curriculum. We collect data on curriculum implementation, including student formative and benchmark data. So those are different types of assessment that we would be collecting data on. And then we get teacher input as well.
Mandate teachers to pilot, you use the word voluntary.
No, it's a volunteer. We love to have teachers pilot so we get that information from them and we can see, is this working for our students and do teachers like it? So that way we can really make an informed decision before.
Is there a
adopting
limit on the number of volunteers?
No.
Is there like a time frame for how long the piloting is, or is that on an individual basis for what we're trying to involve, or is it like by
We'd like to pilot for a year, so that way we get a full experience with it. Sometimes it will, if it comes in later in the year, it would extend for the whole school year. And for example, iReady is a curriculum we're piloting right now, and it started last year and it's continuing through this year. So it's a 1.5 years of piloting. So we want a significant length of time, at least a year, to get the information that we need.
iReady math or reading?
Reading. Then the curriculum committee meets to review the data from the pilot in a public meeting. So this is where a public meeting would be held, that we would present that information that had been collected. And then that curriculum committee would make a recommendation to the school board to be put on display for the required 60 days. And then the school board would vote on the curriculum.
So just a question on that. So curriculum is actually being used in the classroom for a year before it's ever approved by a board or even brought to be discussed by the board? Or has that changed with now even before that pilot program is implemented?
As of right now, pilots don't come to the school board.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important to point out here is that we really rely on as much stakeholder information as we can get. We're getting information from researchers through that ESSA evidence. We're getting information from teachers, we're getting information from administration, information from the public. So we really encourage, as you mentioned, for as much engagement as possible, so that way we know what the true data is on that curriculum before we adopt it. This is the curriculum adoption cycle that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to explain this chart to you. That on the left side of the screen is our subject area and grade level. So you'll see it's broken out by ELA is English Language Arts for grades K-8, and then the next line is English Language Arts for high school, and so on down the chart. The second column shows our current curriculum for that particular grade level, and it also includes the year that it was adopted. The third column over says the next year that it will be piloted, so you can see in 23-24, our current school year, we are piloting the iReady reading curriculum. And then for 24-25 is when we would adopt, should the pilot go well and the school board approves it.
Director Alban, would you please explain the term iReady, because reading iReady is being piloted, but iReady is also the benchmark and the overlap and the common use of
Yes.
that term
Yes.
iReady.
So iReady is a big package. It has our math curriculum for grades K-8, and they also have a reading curriculum. So we've already approved the iReady math curriculum to be taught in grades K-8, and then iReady reading is what we're piloting in grades K-5. I should mention that it was approved for, iReady reading was approved for grades 6-8, which you can see it was adopted in 2022. So our iReady pilot for reading is K-5. We also, with iReady, have a benchmark assessment. And so they are an assessment company as well. They assess our students on standards, and we use that to inform our instruction. So it is a curriculum company, but it also includes an assessment built into it. Does that answer?
You hear iReady a lot,
Yes.
and so it's adopted and it's being piloted all at the same time. Could sound confusing.
Yes.
And it's also our federally, well, that we're not federally required to use iReady for our benchmark, but we're required to have a benchmark, and we use iReady. So that term just comes out so often in our conversations with the board. I appreciate you breaking it down.
Yes. I do want to point out the very bottom line of this chart mentions Cambridge, and this is all grades and subjects. So we'll talk a little bit more about Cambridge when we get to the our accelerated learning programs. But the Cambridge curriculum was adopted, I believe it was in 2010. Dr. Dorner, do you remember if that was the year it was adopted? Okay. And when that curriculum was adopted, the entire Cambridge philosophy was approved, which includes the knowledge that their syllabi change to keep up with, just to keep improving their syllabi. So the syllabi were approved, as well as any materials that were involved with Cambridge that are Cambridge, labeled with the Cambridge University Press label on them. So that is something that's been approved for 13 years. So we have this cycle created with our adoption policy. Because we've done so much research prior to adopting anything, we do not anticipate making changes to the curriculum because we've done our due diligence prior to adopting it. However, should there be a major change that comes along, such as state standards change, if the state standards change, then we definitely need to review our curriculum to make sure it meets those standards. And if we needed to move something around in here, we would, in order to be in compliance with the state standards. And also, if we review our curriculum and we feel that it's still meeting our needs, we don't necessarily have to adopt if it's current and it's what our teachers need. I'm going to move on to the 3 tiers of support, and this is just a little background knowledge for you before we move on to the next section. This is supported in policy IHA, which I'm going to flip back to. So in policy IHA, the first paragraph, the last sentence of it, I'm sorry, I'll wait until I know it's interesting flipping through. The last sentence of policy IHA says the curriculum will be broad in scope and provide for a wide range in rate, readiness, and potential for learning. So this is something that is used frequently in education, these 3 tiers of support. And it will come up in some subsequent slides, so I want to just give you some information about it. Tier 1 is our core classroom instruction. It's the base of the pyramid where all students receive that instruction. And the goal is for at least 80% of our students to master the standards in Tier 1 instruction. But because we know all of our students have different and varying needs, we do have other layers of instruction. So next, above Tier 1 is Tier 2. And this would be targeted small group instruction for those students that didn't quite grasp the standards in Tier 1. We'd move them up to Tier 2, where they would get additional instruction in those standards and maybe fill in some gaps that they're missing. And the way the model is built is that at least 15% of the students should have their needs met in Tier 2. And then the top tier, the smallest tier, Tier 3, is intensive individual intervention. And that is where our students that may have specific learning disabilities or maybe are English learners, they may fall into that Tier 3 category. And that would be about 5% of the students that may need that intensive individual intervention.
So the 15% and the 5% make up the 20 that may not.
Right,
Okay.
correct. And like, as I said, you'll see reference to tiered instruction in these next few slides. Okay. So these are our instructional minute recommendations for the primary grades. You see I have some state statutes referenced here, ARS 15701. That's, if you'll recall, that's the very first statute we looked at that was relevant to common school curriculum. And in letter A, 2A through B, it specifically talks about reading instruction. And then ARS 15752, we'll look at it later, but just so you know, that is specific to our EL targeted instruction. So in these instructional minutes, on the left side of the screen, you can see the subject, and then the daily minutes are next to them, along with the district adopted curriculum or instructional model that students will be using for that subject area, students and teachers will be using. The first line, reading Tier 1, you'll see that it's state mandated, and that is mandated through that ARS 15701. That's our Tier 1 instruction. Our core instruction that every student receives in reading is 120 minutes. And during that time, teachers use Journeys and the iReady pathway. The iReady pathway is not the reading curriculum because it's not been adopted yet. That is part of that assessment that I had mentioned earlier. Students take a diagnostic assessment, and then they have a pathway created to meet their specific needs based on their performance on that assessment. Then you have reading Tiers 2 and 3, also state mandated. So those are those additional minutes for students who did not master the standards in Tier 1. They have additional time mandated by the state. Tier 2 is an additional, I'm going to look at my notes here, additional 90 minutes per week. And Tier 3 is an additional 225 minutes per week. And so that along with, you can see over in the chart, the EL targeted instruction, those are English learners. They also have a required number of minutes that need to be taught so that to master English, and they're required to have 300 minutes per week. So all of those requirements or statutes combined together equal 75 minutes, additional minutes a week for reading instruction. I'm sorry, a day.
So I'm going to just pop in real quick.
Yes.
As board members, you might often hear about this particular slide. We work with school administrators and teachers quite often on balancing mandated minutes with autonomy and creativity. We certainly always want teachers to have autonomy and choice and decision-making options in their classroom. So you can see where the mandates and then that piece come together. So we work again with schools to make sure while you're using Journeys and there has to be 120 minutes a day, you certainly can make all the decisions within your classroom. We don't determine their bell schedule for them or how they deliver that lesson in particular, just that it's a consistent pathway for all students and that it meets the mandate.
And because there are these requirements from the state. Our goal with creating this was to show how all of the other subjects could fit into a daily schedule. So this is a sample suggestion of how we'd like to see instruction happen, but if there are, teachers do have that freedom outside of the mandates to meet the needs of their students.
A lot of them, we have some fantastically creative teachers. I mean, you get out in the classrooms and you watch them implementing their craft, and it's absolutely wonderful to see where, you know, a lot of teachers will take the social studies curriculum, for example, and blend it with other subjects, because reading for information is super important in the world today. So take some informational text in social studies and blend it in with reading in addition to the journeys, or science and math can often be done together. And that's where the fun and the joy of teaching to me comes in. Is yes, we have our mandates and our minutes and all the things we have to fit in, but we could be super creative and making lessons relevant and fun and engaging, the word most of you chose, for all students. So yeah, this actually was born out of a meet and confer meeting. Meet and confer is where we have representatives from every school. This chart was born out of there. Every school has a teacher, a certified person in our committee, and a couple of years ago they said, can we just really nail down what's mandated and how we can fit it all in and what our curriculum is? So I appreciate the curriculum department building this for us.
Yes, it's definitely nice to have a framework and then freedom within the framework. Yeah. This next slide shows upper elementary. You'll see there's nothing on the left that says state mandated. However, you'll see EL targeted instruction is bolded in the body of the chart, because that is state mandated. Wherever we have EL students, they are required to receive targeted instruction and integrated, am I using the right word, Mrs. Sipe? Thank you. Integrated instruction throughout the school day. And so that is why we have that tiers 2 and 3 in reading set aside for 75 minutes, specifically so those EL students are receiving that state mandated instruction in English. So grades 4 and 5 definitely have less state mandates. However, the prior slide with the state mandates, these are based in best practices. This is also a recommendation from the state, so that's why we continued the format here. And there is a little bit more freedom, but we really do want to see our students mastering the standards, and which is why we have so much time allocated to reading, and math are big chunks of time in the school day. I'm going to keep on going. I will assume that you'll jump in with questions as we go. So this is our instructional model, and it's used in all grades, K through 12, but you will see on this slide minutes per period. That would be on an average 1 hour class period, so it can be used in middle schools and high schools, but the times can be adjusted for longer blocks of time or shorter blocks of time. But this is what typical instruction would look like, that starting with the Arizona State Standard or the Cambridge Assessment Objective, which I should mention have been crosswalked with our state standards, so we know that Cambridge curriculum is also meeting the Arizona State Standards. And that's done prior to the lesson. The teachers will identify that state standard that's being taught, and then they will break it down. If you remember back to the standards we looked at, they're very broad, so they can't be taught in a day. Obviously, this is a year-long process, so each day would be a breakdown of specific skills that teachers are going to be working on with their students. And that's what's done prior as part of the lesson planning. Then within the actual lesson, that objective or that daily skill is posted, and teachers will refer to that during the lesson so students know what the ultimate goal is, what they're going to be learning that day. So a lesson would start with that and then move into an anticipatory set. And that is where we get students engaged in the learning. So I did that with you this morning with our KOSD mission, got you focused on what we're working on today. Just a quick discussion or a quick jogging of the brain to get us going on the topic for the day. The next 3 pieces are the main part of instruction. We have direct instruction, guided practice, and independent practice. You'll frequently hear it referred to as I do, we do, and you do, meaning that the teacher is doing it and demonstrating it. Then the students are working on it with guidance from the teacher, and then working on it by themselves in that independent practice. And the times for these can vary from 10 to 20 minutes depending on what the content is that day. And over on the right side, you can see what happened, the teacher actions during those times. So during the I do, the teacher is delivering content. We do, even though the teacher's standing there talking, the students should still be engaged. Perhaps the teacher will stop and ask a question, and they'll talk to their table partners or their shoulder partner, or they'll take notes as they're working through, as the teacher is giving instruction. The teachers will also do checks for understanding, so they'll just stop and ask quick questions to see if students are following along with what's being taught, and if they need to change the direction of what they're teaching that day, if they need to adjust the learning. And then we always like to see or expect to see collaborative and active learning, meaning how are students engaging and working with each other on that lesson. Then the guided practice, the teacher will be monitoring that as it's happening. If they are noticing that the whole group is not mastering the standard, they may say, pull the group back and do some more instruction on it to reteach it. Or if there's just a select group of students, they might pull that group of students aside and work with them. Then finally, that independent practice would be a final project or assessment that students would do to demonstrate their learning. And those three things don't necessarily all have to happen in one lesson. If, let's say, the skill is being taught over multiple days, that independent practice might happen on day 2 or day 3.
It can also happen out of order, where
Yes.
the teacher might have direct instruction and then give a minute of independent instruction if they're checks for understanding, and show them that the kids are grasping it quickly. And that's where then you can monitor or adjust as back into the guided practice. You never want to have guided practice and then send it home for independent practice for homework. That's a debate that's huge in education right now, because if we don't know that they can independently do it, they shouldn't be doing it at home where we can't monitor and adjust. So it's fun stuff.
Yes. And then closure, this is expected every single day. It's probably the hardest one to do, especially in the upper 6 through 12 when you're up against time with that bell. But remembering to pause before at the last 5 minutes of the class and wrapping up the lesson for the day, having students reflect on the learning, referring back to the standard, and really gives a teacher a chance to find out where students are with that lesson. Something they might do is write a ticket out the door, which would just be rate your learning for the day. How do you feel about today's knowledge? Or they might do a retrieval practice, which is where they'd have to recall learning from a prior lesson, and the more they have to retrieve those lessons, the more solidified it becomes in their long-term memory. So closure is very important and should be quick, just like the anticipatory set. Okay, so we've been through curriculum, we've been through the standards, we're moving on to assessments. Assessments are in state statutes 15701, 15704, and 15741. The 15741 is titled Assessment of Pupils, and that statute outlines what's expected for state assessments. And those are the assessments that we give each spring to most of our students. And all state assessments are overseen by the State Board of Education. And you can flip to that if you'd like to, but I'll definitely be summarizing assessments through these next few slides. It also is KOSD policies IHA and IL. So we're going to go through 3 different types of assessments. They start with informal to more formal and standardized. The first is formative assessments, and there's 2 different types of formative assessments that I'm going to present. The first is checking for understanding, which I mentioned in the instructional model, and that's when teachers are just checking in throughout the lesson to make sure that students are learning. So they might say, after teaching a concept, they might ask students to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they comprehended. It has its pros and cons, I will definitely say, but they can do that, as I mentioned, a ticket out the door, or they can just start asking questions of students based on the standards to see if they are mastering the standards. And it should show student thinking as they're asking those questions. So that's really informal. It happens every single day as teachers are teaching. The more formal type of formative assessments are called common formative assessments, and these are developed by a team of teachers designed to measure student learning of a specific concept. They are administered in multiple classrooms by multiple teachers, and then the teachers bring all of that data from that assessment to a professional learning community or a PLC, and that's where they evaluate, okay, did our students learn it? Is there a teacher whose students did really well? What strategies did they use? How can we implement those strategies in our classroom? So those are really helpful to build teams in schools and really collaborate on learning within students, and those happen less frequently than the checks for understanding. The next type of assessments are benchmark assessments, which we referenced a little bit earlier. These assessments are mandatory through Title I and Move On when reading, which I'll give you some more information about those in a little bit, but these are mandatory assessments. They are administered 3 times a year in high school and 4 times a year in elementary and middle schools, and we have a district adopted assessment calendar that there are testing windows, 2 weeks testing windows specific to our benchmark assessments. So everybody in the district is testing during those times. Data from the benchmark assessments are used to determine student mastery of state standards for both English language arts and math. Teachers work with their school and district leadership. Well, they work amongst themselves and then also with school and district leadership to analyze that data from the benchmark assessments and determine if they need to modify instruction at all to meet students' needs. And then we also rely on that benchmark data to predict student success on our summative assessments, which is our state assessments at the end of the year. So these are our checks, periodic checks as we lead up to the summative assessments. So summative assessments, as I said, are in ARS 15741. These are standardized tests administered every spring, and the data from the summative assessments are used to determine school letter grades. This is a chart of all of the summative assessments that we have. We have Arizona's Academic Standards Assessment, which is the AASA in grades 3 through 8 for ELA and math. And then science is assessed in grades 5, 8, and 11. The ACT Aspire is given to grades 9, and grade 9, and ACT is given to grade 11. Those 2 assessments evaluate English, math, reading, science, and writing. The Azella test, which is our assessment for English language learners, is given to any student that indicates that their parents have indicated they speak any language other than English when they register, and it is given to students in grades K through 12, and it assesses all components of English language, reading, writing, speaking, and listening. There's also the MSAA, which is the multi-state alternate assessment, and that is given in grades 3 through 8 and 11 to students who have needs that they cannot take a state assessment. So these would be students on IEPs that would be referred to alternative assessments.
Students on IEPs.
No,
Could you break
correct.
that down a little more?
Yes. I may have Vicki jump in and with that one too, but it's not every student qualifies for the alternative assessments. They have to have specific needs and it's a certain percentage of our students that can qualify for the alternative assessment. Should I add anything else, Vicki? Or Lisa?
The state puts on a 1% cap, so 1% of our students who test can have the alternate assessment. If our population is higher than that, we have to get special approval. So we really work on that with our teams, and the IEP team has to fill out paperwork to show that they're low with not only cognitive but adaptive skills in order to qualify.
The technical skills assessment are given in high school to all students that are completing a CTE program, and it's evaluating their knowledge of that CTE pathway that they completed. We also have Cambridge assessments, which are given in middle and high school to all of our Cambridge courses, and those are end-of-course exams that demonstrate student mastery of those Cambridge assessment objectives. And one of the nice features that we have with Cambridge is that students can earn a Grand Canyon High School diploma at the end of their sophomore year, they just have a couple of other coursework requirements, and those students can choose to graduate from high school early if they like to, or they can stay with KUSD and take advantage of our dual credit courses with MCC. We typically do not have many students take advantage of that Grand Canyon diploma because of the benefits we have with MCC, but it is a nice option for our students. I also have the kindergarten entry assessment listed here. This is not given in the spring, but I did want to mention it, that this is a state legislated assessment that is administered in the fall to incoming students within the first 45 days of enrollment. This data is not included in school letter grades, and you can see over on the right it assesses math, language, literacy, cognitive, physical, social, emotional development, all of the assesses the whole child. So teachers have data on their incoming kindergartners. One of the state statutes that we have is Move On When Reading, or MOWR. Our acronyms are coming in. So we have, this is mandated in 15704 and also policy IHA. This policy is designed to provide students with evidence-based, effective reading instruction in kindergarten through 3rd grade. So this is focusing on our primary grades, and you'll notice that it coincides with those state mandated minutes, instructional minutes on that slide that we looked at earlier. Students in 3rd grade must demonstrate foundational reading skills on the AASA, that state assessment, in order to promote to 4th grade. Schools must develop a literacy plan that includes effective instruction, interventions, and assessment of reading for all students in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade. So the schools have a plan to make sure that students are learning the state standards in order to be promoted to 4th grade. And then schools also must have at least one dyslexia training designee in kindergarten through 3rd grades, and this teacher is trained on dyslexia and works with students throughout the school. Lisa, is there anything else I should mention about anything in there? No? Okay, all right. School letter grades. I'm going to put some information up here, and I'll just have Lisa summarize it. If we're going to start with, and you can just stay there, Lisa, if you want to. Yeah, if you want, or you can stand up. It's up to you. Yo, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead if you want to. So, starting with grades K-8, we have a specific model for them. So, I'll go ahead.
So I know this says percentages, but think of it as points out of 100 points, because it actually breaks down. If we have our EL cohort at a school, it's broken down by 100. If a school does not have a cohort of 10 EL, English language learner students in their testing grades, then it's broken down by 90. But most of our schools are qualifying under the 100 now. So for proficiency is when we take our state testing, and it's broken down into 4 categories. We have minimally proficient, partially proficient, proficient, and highly proficient. Proficiency covers the students that are proficient and highly proficient. So out of our model, 30 points out of the 100 come from the percent of students that are in that proficiency category. 50% is growth. That's the majority of the school letter grade for K-8 is the growth. Growth is determined in a couple of ways. Out of the 50 points, right now, last year in 2022, 2023, it was broken down. 25 of the points are ELA, 25 of the points are math. And they look at the growth of the students. It does not mean our students are competing against each other in Kingman. It's all the students in the state. So for example, the 4 of you, let's pretend you're all 3rd graders last year in 2023, and you all scored 2,500 on the AASA for a score. You might be from Tucson, you might be from Bullhead, Kingman, and where? Havasu. Okay? So now, because you guys all scored the same, you're in a cohort competing against each other when you go on to 4th grade. that's how the growth points are determined. It's how the student compares against their cohort from the previous year. That's how the points are determined. Do you have questions on that? Because that gets kind of dicey sometimes. It's hard for people to understand. Okay, so that's where the 50% come from. And this year, that was to our benefit for our school letter grades. The other 10%, I'm just going by the car. Okay, so this 10% right here is our EL students. Now again, if we have 10 FAE EL students, English language learner students in a school.
What's FAE?
Oh, I'm sorry. FAE is if they are enrolled within the first 10 days of school starting, and then they're with us the whole time without moving to a different school in the district. They have to be in the same school to be FAE all the way through the testing window in the spring.
And
Is
it stands for full academic year.
full academic year. So most of our schools do have at least 10 FAE EL students. So that's where this 10 points comes in. Now those 10 points are broken down into two categories again. 5 points are proficiency and 5 points are growth. And those points we do not know until the school letter grades start to come out, because it's compared to how we do with the state average. And from my understanding, we're going to have another workshop to go into this in more detail and show you examples on how that is determined. But that's how these 10 points are determined here. The 10 points here is considered acceleration and readiness. So we are capped at 10 points. A school might earn more than 10 points, but you are capped at 10 points. Now things that fall into this category for our middle school students, because it does go through 8, are 8th grade students in math. So they look at the prior year proficiency in math. If the next school year your percentage is higher, you earn points in this category. If you look at the students that scored minimally proficient in 8th grade math, and you can lower the number of minimally proficient, you'll earn points in this category. Another subgroup in this category is the 3rd grade reading tests. Again, so they look at the students that scored minimally proficient. As long as you can lower that percentage of students that were minimally proficient, you will earn points. Chronic absentee falls into this category. So schools will look chronic absentee. Chronic means that it's 10% of the school year. So for us, we're at 145 days. Anybody that's 14 days or more is considered chronic absenteeism. If we can lower that percentage from year to year, we're earning points. Also in this category is where they look at our subgroups. Subgroups are female, male, all the ethnic backgrounds, SPED, migrant, fit, all of those subcategories are in there. And that's where we can earn up to 6 of those 10 points, but again, we're capped. And in order to earn those points, again, they look at how the student tested the previous year, and now how are they testing this year. If we improve, we earn points in that category. And that's how they total up to the 100 points, the determined school letter grades, and those will be coming out in probably the next 2 weeks. I believe by state law, it's November 7th they will release those by, but I'm pretty sure we're gonna know before the end of October.
There you go.
Okay. Sorry. So high school is just a little bit different from the K-8. So this is for 9 and 12 only. Again, you're looking at proficiency. They're looking at how many students are scoring proficient or highly proficient, and then they take the average and work out the percentage. So that's 1/3 of the whole letter grade. Now you'll notice here the growth or the subgroup improvement, instead of 50%, it's only 20% of the letter grade for the high school students. Okay, and again, they're going to look at your subgroups in there to determine on your growth. English language learners is still 10%. It's still broken down 5% for proficiency and 5% for growth. Graduation, the graduation is broken into 2 segments. It's 20 points out of the 100, but you have graduation rate. If your the percent of students graduating increases, you'll earn up to 10 points. And then the other part is improvement, and that's where they're looking at more subgroups, like how many students are graduating at the 4-year, 5-year, 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, and 7-year. And then your last one is college career and readiness. We call those as CCRI. So that is 20 points for your schools also. Now that's a breakdown, and that's where the Cambridge comes in, your CTE, career technical, come in, and your regular academics. So there's two sides to this. There's the blue side, which is mainly academic side. How many students are qualified for ABOR or cover all the required coursework that they need for the ABOR. It's the proficiency on your ACT. It's Cambridge and all the high academics, advanced placement, dual credit classes. That's on the blue side. And then there's a red side, which is more of your career technical side, where they're doing the
CTE courses and ASVAB, and I'll go more into depth in that in a little bit, so
Okay.
you don't have to
Okay.
remember them all right off the top of your
Okay.
head. It's
So
not easy to do.
then the nice part about this is if a student is more on the academic side, on the blue side, they can earn up to a point. And if a student is more career orientated, they could earn a point on the red side. Now the nice part is if we have students that earn a full point on the blue side and a full point on the red side, they get a bonus point of 22 points into the calculations to determine what our CCRIs are for the school. And the one that's right down the middle, we get to determine does it fall on the red side or the blue side, is the FAFSA. That's the student financial report. So we highly encourage everybody to fill that out, because then we get credit for that. And then those points, we can determine if a student is just shy on one side, we can apply those points to either side to get them to the full point, so that we're earning points on the CCRI.
All right, thank you. And then I just have a comparison on this slide so you can see them both together at the same time, that there's the K-8 is definitely different from 9-12. Thank you very much, Lisa. Okay, we're going to move into grants. This is Director Eastman oversees grants, and unfortunately she wasn't able to be here today, so I'm going to do my personal best to go through grants. If you have questions, if I can't answer them, I have a feeling Dr. Dorner will be able to answer them, but I can always take them back to Director Eastman as well. So the grants, one of the grants that we'll be looking at comes from State Statute 15752, which is specific to our English language learners, or I'm sorry, our English learners. And then you can see the KOSD policies that support that statute are IHAA and IHBE. So I mentioned ESSA earlier. This is a little bit of information about ESSA. This ESSA stands for Every Student Succeeds Act. It was signed into federal law in 2015, which replaced the No Child Left Behind, which had been adopted in 2002. These are just some highlights about ESSA, but you also, behind tab 5 in your binder, have some information about ESSA, tiers of evidence, and give some more information about that. So that's behind tab 5. I'm going to keep moving on, but I will point out that some of the highlights of ESSA are that it is really looking at our students that are disadvantaged and have high needs, that we're giving them the support that they need to make progress on the standards. It's students are in America, all students in America are taught to high academic standards, looking at local innovations, and so on. So those are some of the highlights of ESSA. ESSA evidence is that it is requirements that are designed to ensure that states, districts, and schools can identify programs, practices, products, and policies that work across various populations. So what that means is that research is done on particular programs or strategies or practices, products, and those things are researched, and it is determined if that particular item promotes the growth of students that meet whatever criteria they're saying that they do. So this is where we get our research for any curriculum or products that we implement. So educators will be looking for high-quality research and evidence-based interventions to strengthen grant applications. You'll hear us talking frequently about it has ESSA evidence to support, which is why we put it into the grant. It supports comprehensive targeted schools, and it implements new programming in their schools. There are 4 different tiers of evidence. Tiers 1 and 2 are the strongest. So tier 1 is strong evidence, tier 2 is moderate evidence. Tiers 3 and 4 are not as strong, and the back of your handout goes into more depth about what the different tiers are.
Can I just make one comment?
Of course.
I actually really like the ESSA evidence requirement. Before, companies had to have empirical studies to show evidence of working. Sales folks were on our doorsteps constantly. School districts are prime zones for people selling us things, snake oil almost at some level. This program works. This is what you've got to have. This is going to solve your problems. All your kids will learn with this. And before ESSA was required, we would have to kind of do our own research, and everything they said to us we would hope was true, and we'd find out or not. That's why Liz referenced earlier we do our due diligence. Since evidence, we'll have sales folks call us now, and we will say, what's your evidence? What tier does your evidence support? And we even had programs, I think, at the time that were not ESSA evidence, not on the ESSA evidence list, that we would then go into negotiations with our contractors and say, you either have to show us the research and get on the list, or we're moving on. So I really appreciate this requirement.
I agree. It's very helpful to know that somebody is doing that. That's time-consuming work to get all of that research on all of the programs that are coming to us. So it's very beneficial. So these are all of the grants that Director Eastman oversees. There's quite a list here. We had a board workshop, was it a year ago or so, that went over many of these grants. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but this is where we have funding that comes in, and any strategies that we implement have to have ESSA evidence in order to be written into the grant for us to purchase to support any of these programs.
At our budget workshop, we have our M&O dollars, our capital dollars, and then our other supplemental dollars, which are usually the grants. And I want to say, off of memory, we're 50-51 on the M&O. You look at our budget capacity, and I believe it's about 20 million. It's significant, the number of dollars that come through the grants that increase our budget capacity. And in order to maintain them, obviously, if we give you this money, then you must comply with our demands. So it's super important we know it funds some of our teachers, funds a lot of our paraprofessionals, it funds the other half of our kindergarten day, because only a half-day kindergarten is mandated. We want all-day kindergarten. Grant funds pay for the other portion of it. So as we move forward into the budget workshops that will be like late January, early February, this will come into play a lot when we're making budget decisions as a team. It's amazing the kinds of things that are funded in the district that without these dollars, we wouldn't be able to function.
Thank you.
But, so you don't have to go into
No.
great detail, because during the budget workshop, they will become intimately acquainted with all of them.
Yeah. And so I did just want to focus specifically on these grants that affect curriculum. So this Title III Office of English Language Acquisition Services comes from ARS 15752 and board policies IHAA and IHBE. And this is the state statute for English learners. So in 2019, the State Board of Education developed research adopted models for structure of English immersion, which is SEI, and that includes the minimal instructional minutes for EL students, and that was built into our instructional minutes document. According to the state, LEAs must implement one of the state-approved SEI models, which are a pull-out model, a 2-hour model, or a newcomer model. And I'm only going to focus on pull-out because that's what KUSD implements. So within that pull-out model, EL students are required to receive 2 different types of English instruction. The first is integrated instruction, which is students working with their English peers, speaking peers in small groups. Elementary students are required to have 300 minutes a week in integrated instruction, and secondary students must have 250 minutes per week. Exactly. And Lisa, that time does not all have to be done at the same time. That can be throughout the day. Okay. Targeted instruction is EL students are pulled out, so that's where the pull-out model comes from. They're pulled out of class for focused attention on EL learning standards. And again, you'll see the required minutes for each grade span, the same as the integrated minutes. So these are two separate blocks of time that students are required to have for their EL instruction. All right. Oh yeah, please do.
For the targeted instruction for our EL students, it's not a whole different set of standards. It's the same English language arts standards, but they break it down to 10 essential that our students are working on. So it's not above and beyond. It works with what's being done in the classroom.
Thank you. Lisa we rely on Lisa for EL. She is our go-to person for that. So, then we have additional grants. These are state grants. So we have Move On When Reading, which I had mentioned earlier. That's that K-3 program that is built to ensure that our students, that when they get to 3rd grade, are able to pass the AASA and move on to 4th grade. Early literacy grants are for literacy for K-3 schools. Early childhood quality improvement practices, or EQUIP, are in our preschools. And then the state tutoring funds would be for schools that have been assigned a letter grade of D or F. Our next section is exceptional students, and these are students who have special learning needs. This pertains to students with disabilities or those who are identified as gifted. So it's on either end of the spectrum is where our exceptional students are. There are state statutes referenced here. 15763 is for special education, and 15779.01 is for gifted education. I'm going to hand it over to Director Trujillo to discuss about special education.
All right. The child find, that is required through federal law, and that's where we identify those students with disabilities. We monthly have screenings at our preschool to get those kids who are not quite in school age. And then in the school system, all students who first enter KUSD have what's called a screener. And every 45 days, within the first 45 days, they are screened. It applies to everyone, whether they're homeschooled or not. They are eligible for child find and to participate in special education. So here at KUSD, we have several different programs. We have district level programs and school level programs. Federal law doesn't requires us to provide the programs, but we don't have to provide the same program in every campus. We can make it work within our district. We have the SAFE program, and this is for our kids with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities. They will stay in a self-contained classroom all day. Most of our students who have the moderate to severe intellectual disabilities attend Little Explorers in the SAFE program and then move on to Kingman High School. Our Essentials programs we have at 3 elementary schools and 2 middle schools and at the high school. Then we have Little Explorers, which is our developmental preschool, which is phenomenal, and they work with all of our students. And really our goal at that developmental preschool age is to help our kids meet their needs and overcome their developmental disabilities.
And what's our preschool rated?
It's a 5-star school.
And how many of those are in Kingman?
1.
Just a little plug there for Little Explorers.
And then we have the BASC program. That's for our students who sort of fall in between that specific learning disability and the essentials. They're a little bit higher and they just fit a little bit better there. We have our autism support program, which is relatively new. Students eligible with autism is growing leaps and bounds. So we have a set of students who attend Little Explorers. They participate in the autism support program. It provides the students with smaller class sizes and they're more geared towards their needs. Just because a student has autism doesn't mean they go to Little Explorers. It's all based upon their individualized need. And we also have an EDP program. This we apply through the state. It's a separate private day school, it's considered. It's for our kids with emotional disabilities. We have one at Desert Willow and Kingman High School. They pretty much stay all day in their own classroom, and we really gear it into those social skills along with their academics to help them be able to regulate their behavior. School level programs, we have resource programs. The design will vary by campus, and that's for students with typically with specific learning disabilities. What curriculum resources? The nice thing about all the curriculum that's adopted, they have intervention materials, they have materials for kids with specific learning disabilities or any type of disability. So iReady, because it focuses on the kids' current levels, works with our students too. There's reteach materials, the Haggerty, the Spalding, the Read Naturally, Barton and Edmark all help. Pretty much any material that is used can also be used with our special education students.
Would that be considered, I know I'm putting you on the spot, sorry, the Haggerty, the Spalding, the Read Naturally, are those supplemental?
Those would be supplemental.
So that's an example to your question earlier.
And like even our Beyond textbooks, which is the curriculum map that we use, it has intervention guides. Their unwrapped documents will help your special education teacher review what the standard should be for right now with a second grader, and what they would have learned in first grade and what they would have learned in kindergarten to help you really help fill in those gaps. And that is it.
Mentioned the other spectrum of the exceptional students is our accelerated learners or gifted students, and that is overseen through the accelerated learning program, which Margaret Stevenson coordinates. That policy IHBB. So I'm just going to give you an overview of how gifted students are identified, and then their needs are met through KOSD. The COGAT is the grade 2 universal screener that's given in the spring to all second grade students. And then based on those scores, students are identified as gifted and are put into a gifted classroom or have a gifted program that they participate in. And they also identify accelerated students based on that COGAT as well.
However, if a parent requests screening before or after that, we do comply with that request as well.
Thank you. The accelerated and gifted K-5 program is determined at the site level. We do have self-contained classrooms at Surbat, Manzanita, and Wallapai. The other schools either would participate in project-based learning for those students or a pull-out program, so they would not be in a self-contained gifted classroom at the other schools. Yes, Manzanita, Surbat, did I say Surbat, Manzanita, and Wallapai are three schools. Okay. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have Cambridge, which is currently in pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. Our Little Explorers is piloting the Cambridge Early Years curriculum currently. The primary grades K-5 are at Black Mountain. I should clarify that. K-2 are not piloting Cambridge right now at Black Mountain, but grades 3 through 5 are implementing at Black Mountain, and next year K-2 will be there. Lower secondary is Cambridge's term for the students in grades 6 through 8, and that program is at all 3 of our middle schools. It looks a little bit different at each school, how they implement it. And then at the high school level, there's 2 different levels. There's IGSE, that stands for the International General Certificate of Secondary Education, and that is grades 9 and 10 at both of our high schools. And then there are advanced courses, which is what the A stands for, or AS is advanced subsidiary, so students will be in an AS class prior to being in an A-level class. That is for grades 11 and 12. And when we can, we also offer those courses, combine those courses with dual credit from MCC. And those are at both of our high schools as well. Another advanced learning opportunity we have is the dual credit options through MCC, and that's very exciting that we have that opportunity for students to earn free college credit starting in high school. Speaking of high school, this is oh yes, please. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. All right, should I pause? Okay, all right. High school pathways, this is our end journey for KUSD. Again, we've got policies 15701.01 and 15782. And then, I'm sorry, those are state statutes, and policies are IH, AMC, and IKF. So just some brief information about high school. Lisa had mentioned the College and Career Readiness Indicators, which are CCRI. She mentioned that CCRI is 20% of the school letter grade calculation for Arizona high schools, and that they earn those points through benchmarks, which are on their high school pathway. And this is what Lisa was referring to. There's a blue side and a red side. Blue side is college ready, red side is career ready, and within each of those categories you can see the components that students can meet to earn points on either blue or red or both. At the very bottom, the FAFSA is in purple because, as Lisa mentioned, it can count towards the blue side or the red side. It is optional, but we do like to promote that for students because it might get more students to attend post-secondary education, whether it's college, university, community college, or technical schools. That FAFSA will help them. And you'll see the blue side includes the ABOR, the Grand Canyon Diploma, the assessments, and the red side has CTE and the ASVAB, which is the military entrance exam that students can take, or earning credentials through their CTE pathway. Career and technical education is in State Statute 15782. And this is a summary about it, but basically this is where we engage students with applying knowledge towards future careers to become lifelong learners and get them ready for the workplace. There's workplace competencies, and students are expected to be in a lab for part of their CTE curriculum, so they're actually practicing the things that they're learning in class. Each of our high schools have different CTE programs. You can see there's some that you can see what each high school offers. That's very exciting. And then the other thing that's exciting that we're working on right now is that we are creating a document that's a high school pathway that shows what courses a student needs to take starting in their freshman year to get to one of these pathways at the end of their high school career. So let's say a student chooses automotive services. These are the courses you should take, including the CTE electives, and then options for you at MCC to get you certification. So students can really lay out their plan post-high school by looking at that document. Graduation requirements are listed here. This comes from policy IKF. These are just the general education requirements along with electives. The other two components that have been added more recently is a civics test. Students are required to pass with 60%. In class of 2025, will have to earn a 70%, and then they have to complete a CPR training. They don't have to be certified, but they're required to be trained in CPR. So we're back to the beginning again. And what I'd like you to do is just look back at the KUSD mission and think about that word that you circled at the very beginning. And is there something from today's workshop that applies to that word that you circled? Anything anybody would care to share with the whole group? All of it? Yeah. Anything specific that anybody would like to share, or something that you learned?
Question. For the CTEs, we are actively working on getting as many of those in as possible. I know it probably takes specialized teachers to come in and do those, but yeah, there's a lot of, what we have is great, but there's a lot of areas that my husband works in the industrial section, and they know they're coming up on a gap of people retiring and not having certified people or people ready to fill those spots.
Actually, you're foreshadowing a major component of our team's work right now.
Yeah.
We're calling it the HOP, High School Opportunity Pathways. We're really working with industry post-high school and 8th grade exposure to career pathways, what's available in our community. Obviously, all the pathways in the world are still available. Medical industry, right? Healthcare is huge in Mojave County. It's one of the #1 hiring industries. The industrial park, the engineering, we know what jobs are available in our community. So we're now talking to our kids about career exploration and careers in addition to college, and then aligning our CTE programs. So instead of having teachers in each CTE area, and I don't want to imply that we're getting rid of anybody or their program, but if kids are not asking for a particular CTE pathway anymore because it's not as relevant and the jobs at the end of it aren't there, then we need to add programs in that are. Instead of putting kids into the programs we want to have programs that kids need. So exactly what your husband said and what you're referencing.
This is my last section. Any final questions or anything else?
When you were for the state grades, school for the grades, the assessments, and do those assessments, are we using those for individual students? Because it seemed like when it was explained, it's all just a big pool and the numbers are, based off gathering, but especially in the growth category, are we able to, for the growth of an individual students, wherever they are in 3rd grade going to 4th grade? Because our letter grade doesn't seem like it's based necessarily on each individual. It's the big pool, kind of like you called this a cohort of students that were on the same pathway, and how this cohort competed with each other to the grade. But are we able to use that for the individual students also? Or are we're doing all 4 assessments a year, and it's really just this big state thing versus individual students?
No, we collect all of that data. We meet with the individual schools to go over their data.
Okay.
We give them the big picture of how they compare with our district. We break it down to individual student data also, but then it's up to the schools to use that data in an informed process at their sites.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
They track down to the student. We don't share student scores at a global level, but at the schools, the teachers who have those kids, those students, they know their scores, their strengths, their areas. It kind of informs the walk to read decisions where kiddos are placed in the tiering instruction. It all goes together. And yeah, absolutely down to the individual.
Turn it over to you.
We try not to compare it in a district to make it a negative connotation where we're putting schools against each other or classes or teachers against each other, because that's demotivating. So Lisa does a really great job with her team on making it a positive motivational thing. She'll send emails out, like she's talking to teachers right now about seeing some of those growth, and you can see it all the way down to the teacher. So if Lisa was a 3rd grade teacher at Black Mountain and we see that her individual students had growth, she's reaching out and saying, "What did you do?" And then we will actually even go around and present certificates and congratulations to individual students on campuses, in addition to using their scores to grow them. Yeah, that's a great question. So just to wrap it up, I want to pull it all together by looking again at our strategic plan and our 4 priorities. The first one being communication and collaboration. So this workshop is an example of communication and collaboration, but throughout your presentation you saw areas where we need to collaborate with teachers on choosing curriculum, students, stakeholders, talking about what works, coming together, getting with the board, having public meetings. All of that is in the spirit of transparent communication and collaboration. We don't want to make curriculum choices at a district level that nobody's in on, because I've been in this for 32 years, and for a teacher, because most of us in here have been teachers, you don't want just stuff dropped on you. You want to be a part of the process. So that's a really important part of the curriculum process for us. When you look at staff and student well-being, and you just had Vicki and Liz talk about the spectrums of unique learners. You have gifted kiddos. If we're not meeting intellectual needs of our highly capable learners, if they're in a classroom and you're just sort of instructing to the middle, boredom comes out in a lot of different ways. We don't want to lose kids. We can have kids drop out from high school eventually because they never had their individual and personalized needs met on a gifted side, in addition to the child find on the specific learning disabilities or other things. So that well-being piece for kiddos is super important. We have to find those children, whatever level they're at, whatever their unique needs are, and make sure that we meet those needs. And then the staff well-being as well. We want to have a balance, like I said earlier, of the autonomy between the state mandates and the federal mandates and the compliance. You saw a lot of that today. And how to feed a teacher's soul, because they go into teaching to work with kids and impact their learning and their future story, and we want to find space for that as well on the staff and student well-being. The equitable and accessible learning environment goes right along with that. I think if any of you, and some of you do, have children in our district, you want to know, regardless the school or the teacher, they have equitable access to the curriculum. That the teachers are informed, they're engaged, the lessons are engaging, they're getting their needs met. If they're not mastering the standard, we're going to circle back and provide, another layer of education, that we know what we're doing, that we are adopting curriculum that is empirically proven, all of the things, so that it's not up to luck on what school and what teacher you have. We know that across our district, every student has the same opportunity. And that's where the term all comes in our mission. We welcome all students, not just students at this school, this group, that group. We don't have a lottery. We don't pick them because we think they're going to do better. We want all students to have that access to learning. And then finally, the effective and transparent transitions has been the biggest growth in our district in the last couple of years. For decades, it's typical in education to just let them, welcome to kindergarten and here's your diploma. We're great at that. But we really want our families to know preschool through high school what the pathways are, what the opportunities are, the CTE pathways. We want kids to be able to hop onto pathways. We want our kids to graduate high school if they want with a certification to go right into industry, or to have their first 2 years of college already paid for and completed. So that effective and transparent transitions is our pride right now that we're really working on. And while we cannot talk about embargoed letter grades, we have implied a couple of times we're seeing some real progress in that growth area, and I think we're going to have a couple of fun announcements by November 7th. We're never there. We always have work to do, but we're seeing the hard work of teachers, and we can't wait to celebrate what our teachers are doing in this district. So that's it. Now anybody wants to talk about anything else, we'll be here as long as you want, or if you've had your fill of curriculum for the day, we'll wrap it up.
I don't know if it needs to be recorded. Back to the technical part, which she had already brought up. We always do the dual credit for a variety of things. Is that dual credit offered for those technical things while in high school?
Yes, and yes. Yes, it is, and yes, we're expanding. So we have WAVE, that's our partnership with the WAVE JTED board, and they've always funded high school programs such as CNA, welding. They've been in a partnership with MCC where kiddos could leave with a CNA credential, or welding, or automotive. So those have always existed, but we're expanding on it where we'll go ahead and fund for kids, not just dual credit where you're on the blue side of the CCR and you take your English 101 and 102 and your history, the typical, or your welding or your automotive. We're going to ask students to identify their pathway, and anything we don't offer or WAVE doesn't fund, we're going to grant early scholarship with MCC. So the opportunities are literally going to double, triple, quadruple over the next year.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then the WAVE has added funding for what they call the 13th year. That would be the JTED, the CTE board. We are now able to even fund through that program the 13th year. So you might get your diploma in May of 2023, but if you're on our nursing pathway, your courses and your programs will be funded even after you graduate high school, so that we can see our kids to completion of their credential. It's pretty exciting stuff. We're going to be making some announcements. Liz, Margaret Smith, Cassie Veru, Amy West, and our team is working on overhauling our course catalog to go from listing all the courses in high school to listing the pathways, and then color coding these are the courses you'll take in high school, these are the dual credit, and these are the ones you can actually leave our campus, go to MCC, and have paid for while you're still our student. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Because, I went to college and I went to a trade school, and I definitely feel like I benefited more from that idea
Yeah.
of this is my career, this is the
Right.
fundamentals that'll get to it.
Yeah.
And I think that if high school had that option more when I was going to it, I mean, as much as those hours we dedicate to those things, some kids, it's just better to get them where you know their heart is.
Yep.
And I wanted to just make sure that that was offered.
And right prior to you joining our board last year, 2 years ago, one of the good things that happened at our state was the approval of the instructional time model, which is where, we would, I hate to use the term hostage, but we hold kids hostage on the high school campus, taking the classes we have available when really their capacity and their passion and their dream is in a pathway that's not in our school. So they take what we have, biding their time to get the diploma, to leave, and then go to the trade school. Well, we're saying, why don't you just do it with us? You can leave our campus, still be our student, and do it before you leave high school. Yeah. And that doesn't, Liz, I think it was your speaking point where you said what Lee Williams has and what Kingman High has as far as the current technical education pathways. Absolutely on their campuses, but we're also looking at how can a Kingman High student get automotives or a Lee Williams High School student get culinary when it's not a home site program, but it might be what they want. So those are additional goals.
Got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Exciting stuff. I'm so glad you three were here to hear it. Did you learn anything, Star? Because this is already your world. Just or dreams you have for us.
Visiting the schools, it was nice to see the updated equipment we have. You know, it's not the old stuff. You know, it's actually up and current, and the kids are learning on the good equipment versus what we had before. So
Yeah.
that was good to see, especially the welding and the metalwork and the woodworking. It was amazing.
Right. We always say, you know, the CTE board, for whatever funding reasons, and we tease Amy West, Superintendent West, they have the money. And the good news is they're willing to spend it on updated equipment and programs.
It makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference. It's fun for me to be as old as I am now, and having been at a high school, everywhere I go in town, prior students are working, and it's pretty neat to see, and it is a lot of the trade pathways. Our college kids are now graduating and coming back in professional capacities, which is awesome, but you can go just about anywhere and see the impact of our career and technical education trade pathways.
I guess I just have maybe a comment on the adoption procedure where you have your pilot programs in for a year. Have you ever had the pilot programs in for that length of time and then the board went, no, I don't want to do that? And how, I mean, to me, it almost would be devastating for
Backwards, yeah.
something to be in a classroom and loved, and then the board come and say, I don't think that that's an appropriate way. So I'm just curious.
I wrote a note on that too, that we're in the same wavelength. As soon as you asked that question, I thought cart and horse kind of thing is, you know, is this what's always been done? And should we pause and look at approval of the pilot ahead of time? Almost a pre-approval, if you will. If you approve the pilot, you're probably going to approve the adoption if the data presents itself. So actually, that'll probably be a conversation. I don't know if you had the same thought, but that'll be a conversation. No, to my recollection, that hasn't happened, but I don't have a working memory of every pilot ever because I've been in different seats. Yeah. We have had times where staff have said, wah, 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 and we don't, if the teachers aren't at all into it, we're not going to force it. Yeah. All right. Good. That was, I took notes on that. That's a wrap. Thank you, everyone.
Do I have a second? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Yay. Thank you guys very, very much, though. I know it was a lot of work.